We all want to be productive, right? But we also know that being productive is very, very hard. And that's the reason why if you go online and type in how to become productive, there's a lot of articles, there's a lot of TED Talks and websites and gurus and people who dedicated a lot of time on this topic. Now, disclaimer here, I'm not going to pretend to be a productivity guru because I'm not one and I do not intend to be one. But in this video, I'd like to share with you a few tips or a few things, if you will, that have helped me for the past 3 years or more to become more focused and more productive in my business, in learning new things like programming and music, whatever it is that I am interested in. So stay tuned and we're gonna tackle the productivity tips for developers or pretty much anyone really, which I think is pretty much, if you're human, you probably want to be productive. If you're new to this channel, my name is Paulo Dishon. I am a programmer, developer, software engineer. In this channel, I will teach you how to become a well-rounded developer. So a well-rounded developer is somebody who not only knows about the technical side of things, the programming part, but also understand other things around becoming a good developer. Now, before we begin, this is a bit hard to admit and perhaps a little bit embarrassing, but for many years, I was the kind of person who was very busy, meaning that I had projects going, I was working on things, and I was just busy. But the problem with that was that later I realized that I was busy, but I wasn't really being as productive as I could have been. I was what people call a busy bee. So in fact, I even had in one of my social media accounts as my status of how I feel today, it said busy bee, right? So that I took a lot of pride in that I was busy, but again, probably not as productive as it could be. So here's how my day would go. So I would get up in the morning around 7, and then I would wash up and then eat my breakfast. Now, between eating breakfast and then sitting at my desk, my computer to start working, I would jump right in and start working. So I would start just picking and choose whatever is that I thought it would be beneficial for me to work on that day. And that's probably how you probably work. But as you see, with that strategy, there was never a clear vision of what is it exactly I wanted to accomplish. Because it was more of, well, I'm ready now, right? I've eaten my breakfast, it's time to start working. And so there was no vision. All I would be doing really is to check off things out of a list, but not necessarily working on things with a method, with a structure that would get me to where I wanted to get to. Does that sound like something you do or have done? If so, just leave the comments below. Again, there's no judgments here. Now, the sad part is that unfortunately, it seems like this is how a lot of people run their day, being busy and working on a list that literally won't take them to the next level. Now, I have nothing against the list, we'll talk about later, but the idea here is that we need to be focused in order to be productive. Now, let's look at the problem with this approach that I've just told you about, right? The very unfocused approach. Well, the first problem is that you don't have any focus. The second problem is that we tend not to have a bigger goal that we're working towards. So in our case there, we're just doing things that we think it's going to get us to where we want to go. But even if we get there, we would never know because we don't have an actual goal. Secondly, we always feel as if we're not accomplishing as much as we would like to accomplish. The reason why we feel that way is because, well, first of all, we don't have a goal. So how do we know that we are getting closer or far away from the goal if we don't have one, right? It makes sense. This feeling comes from the lack of the actual progress. A very simple analogy I like to use usually is think about if you were to have to move from point A to point B. But the person says, well, you actually don't have a point B. All I want you to do is just to move. Just move. Just keep walking. You notice that if you start moving from A with no direction, you will never know when you got to that destination. It's much simpler and more focused and more valuable to know exactly where it is that we want to go. So from A to B, you know that you need to walk into that direction. One other thing that I think it's important to understand is that progress can be a little bit elusive if there's no end goal, right? Because you can have a book this thick of things you need to do. And you can cross them all down, but the problem is if you don't know exactly where you're supposed to be, what is the end goal, then the movement that we're talking about is going to happen. You will feel as if you're making progress, but you're not moving into the right direction. Hence, you're not making any progress. Now, in order for us to make progress, we need to be productive. But in order for us to be productive, we need to have those goals. So that's what we're getting into. So goals is actually the currency that you need to use to obtain progress. It makes sense because if you want to get to B, you need the goal, which is B. The progress is going to happen because now you know if I go from A to B, if I get halfway through A through B, I'm making progress. But it only happens because we know we need to get to point B. So we need to find a way in which we can quantify our progress. Because if we can't quantify something, then we'll never know exactly where we are in the process. Now, the quantification part of this whole idea that I'm talking about here about progress and productivity is the little things, the little steps you take towards your goal. Those sum up to be the quantity, the quantification that will tell you exactly, okay, I'm now halfway to get to my biggest goal, which is B. So the idea here is that in order for us to see progress, we need to see those quantifications, those little steps moving the needle. Now let's move on to goals. Now goals, again, like I said, is very important because that is what gives a direction. And then once we have the direction, we understand the quantification of small steps that will get us to our destination. Now, the way I like to think about goals is very simple, actually. First of all, I like to write down what the goal is. That's very important because if you don't write down things, chances are that we'll forget it. It's a very simple and naive way of thinking, but it really works. Write it down. You have to write it down. I never liked to write things down, but I learned the hard way that I have to write things down. So you should probably think about writing things down. Okay. And secondly, I started looking at the quantification that I talked about, right? The little steps, the steps I need in order for me to be able to understand and learn about databases, right? So I write it down something very simple. Well, number one, I need to look for books, or I need to buy courses, or I need to go to the library and find specific books that talk about databases. Okay, so I go and find all the materials that I need to start learning. That second step. Okay, again, I'm putting the little steps, the quantification part of the whole process, the whole system of getting stuff done. And the third component here is the timeline. You need to set aside the time that you're going to dedicate to those tasks. This is very important. In my experience, if I don't have a timeline, some sort of a deadline or some sort of a progress that I can start looking at, I tend to be very discouraged, as well as it's easy for me to just forget about it. Does it make sense? If we don't have that timeline, it's going to be hard for us to know if we're really making progress or if we think we're making progress. And this step, this is where I write something like, okay, in 3 months, I should at least be able to create a database. That doesn't matter what tools I'm using, I'm going to be able to create a database at mark X. So 3 months from now or a month from now, depending on your schedule. Now, it's important to also be very honest with yourself. More often, we all have this tendency of wanting to attain more, wanting to be more productive, right? So we tend to not be very realistic with our situation, our time. So be honest. If it takes you 3 months, it will take you 3 months. It's okay. Right? Don't say it's going to take you a month or 3 weeks, if that will just stress you out, and then you're just going to lose interest. So be honest with yourself. In the same line, I say, okay, by the end of that 3 months, right, on 2 months later, I'm going to be able to do Z or Y, etc. Notice again, I am using the quantification, but as well as using this timeline, which is part of the quantifying your progress, because we need to know when are things happening and what are the expectations that we have to ourselves. And the step number 4 of this process is the daily things that I must do in order to attain the goal. So we have our timeline. We know by X day we should be able to at least build something or whatever it is that you're doing. Now we need to break it down to a granular level so we understand, okay, daily, what are the things I'm going to do that at the end of a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, close to my first deadline, I'm going to be able to actually accomplish that goal. Does that make sense? Remember, this is not the goal in itself. It's part of the goal to get to that bigger goal. This is what I call the daily steps, because you have to have daily steps, or maybe every other day steps that you need to allocate so that you can actually make progress. At this point here, I would write, let's say, 3 things I'm going to do daily that will help me to get to my goal. So that could be, for instance, following our example, well, I have the books, so I'm going to read at least 10 pages every day, and then I'm going to do some exercises, and then I'm going to take some time to reflect on what I just learned. Every day or every other day, whenever you have set the time aside to do so. You notice also with all this process, the bigger goal, which was to learn databases, is very daunting. It's such a huge topic. But now, if you break it down, you're quantifying everything. You are breaking everything down into manageable pieces that now it's easier to tackle. And again, you have your timeline, so you know the days that you're supposed to be working on this, and you know by when you're supposed to have at least something done. Now, notice something very interesting. As you start doing this, again, this doesn't have to be only for developers, or you can use this for everything you do in your life. You notice it's going to be much, much easier, and you're not going to feel overwhelmed. You're not going to feel lost all the time, because now you have steps. Now you have a direction. You can quantify, you have timelines, you have daily steps, and so forth. So you will repeat this process, these daily steps, until you get to your goal. And the beauty here is, as you're writing things down, you also have to have time to reflect on what you're doing. That way, later you can go back and revise and see the difficulties, what worked and what didn't work, and so forth. Now, I do realize also that this sounds like more work than what you want to have in your life. But just remember that once you have these systems in place, once you get used to working this way, you get what's most important of everything, which is clarity, right? When you have clarity, it's not like you get up in the morning and you have no idea what you're supposed to do. You know that you have a list of something random you have to do. So you go through all of that like most of the world does. You never really get to that level because you don't have focus, you don't have goals, so it's hard to be productive. All right, thank you so much for your time. I really hope that this was helpful. So if you like what I've just talked about, please leave comments below. Tell me actually if you maybe have different kind of tips about productivity that you use or that you know of. I'm always, open to learning new techniques and so forth. If you like this video, if you like the message that I have in this channel, consider subscribing and liking this video. Also, you can always share this message with your friends, grandma and grandpa and mom and dad, and your cat too, of course. They also need to be productive. And as always, be well, stay well, and of course, code well. I'll see you next time.